Emergency Coordinator Sinara. The human is lighting fires during mandatory evacuation procedures. Sinara's claws scraped across her data tablet as she stared at the junior researcher who just delivered the most incomprehensible field report in her 30-year career. Outside the Emergency Operations Center, the first evacuation transports lifted off into the darkening sky. Darkening 3 months ahead of schedule because the 847-year winter cycle was arriving early. Every climate model confirmed it. Every historical record supported it. Every living soul on the colony world of Keeper's Hope had exactly 6 rotations to evacuate before temperatures dropped to levels that would kill anything with a carbon-based metabolism within hours. Every living soul, apparently, except Sofia Thomas. Define lighting fires, Sinara said, her translator struggling to maintain professional neutrality as her neck plates flared with stress. Multiple combustion events, Zilax reported, his young face showing the particular blend of fascination and horror that only junior researchers could achieve. Open flame, controlled but numerous. The human has constructed what she calls a smokehouse and is actively exposing preserved animal proteins to heat and combustion byproducts. She's also excavating underground chambers and reinforcing her dwelling with additional thermal barriers. When I informed her of the mandatory evacuation order, she asked if I wanted tea. Through the operations center's main viewport, Sinara could see the human's homestead in the valley below. Smoke, actual atmospheric contamination from uncontrolled combustion, rose from at least 3 different structures. As she watched, the human herself emerged from what appeared to be a newly constructed underground entrance, carrying an armload of root vegetables that should have been left to freeze with everything else. Academy Director Sofia Thomas materialized at Sinara's shoulder, his scaled face drawn tight with the particular expression that usually preceded galactic-scale disasters. Tell me the human doesn't understand the severity. Tell me this is a translation error. Tell me something that makes sense. I explained the severity, Zilax said. I showed her the climate projections. 847 years of darkness. Surface temperatures dropping to -200 standard degrees. Atmospheric moisture crystallizing and falling as particulate ice for the 1st century. She listened very carefully, asked several technical questions about wind patterns and precipitation rates, then asked if I'd ever experienced a Minnesota winter. When I said no, she said this would be longer, but the same principle applied. What principle? Sofia Thomas demanded. The principle of dying in horrific environmental conditions? Every species that has attempted to remain on a world during long dark cycles has perished. Every single one. The historical record is unambiguous. Evacuation is not suggested. It's the only option. Sinara was already moving toward the exit. I'll speak with her directly. Perhaps she requires a clearer explanation of the stakes. I'll accompany you, Sofia Thomas said grimly. If she's entering some form of pre-death psychological state, we may need to evacuate her involuntarily for her own safety. The transport flight to Sofia Thomas's homestead took 8 minutes. 8 minutes during which Sinara reviewed everything in the human's file. Age, 47 standard years. Profession, agricultural specialist with expertise in what her records called permaculture and homesteading. Reason for colonization, listed as wanted more space and fewer regulations. Psychological evaluations, all normal, with notes that she demonstrated unusual self-sufficiency and remarkable practical problem-solving skills. Nothing that explained why an apparently rational being was preparing to die in the most prolonged and miserable environmental catastrophe known to galactic science. Sofia Thomas was standing in front of a large metal structure that radiated heat signatures when they landed. She looked up, smiled warmly despite the heavy work gloves on her hands, and called out something that the translator rendered as, "Perfect timing. I could use help hauling this next batch of firewood." Sinara approached slowly, Kailtas beside her, Xilax trailing behind with recording equipment. Up close, the human looked nothing like someone facing imminent doom. Her face was flushed with what the medical database said was increased blood flow from physical exertion. Her clothing was practical, layered, and showed evidence of recent manual labor. Behind her, the smokehouse emitted steady streams of gray-white combustion products that smelled. Sinara's olfactory sensors struggled with the identification. Actually appealing. "Ms. Thomas," Kailtas began, his voice carrying every gram of his authority as director of the Academy's Climate Response Division. "I'm here to personally ensure you understand the gravity of the situation. In 6 rotations, the long dark begins. The historical survival rate for populations that don't evacuate is 0. Not low. 0. Do you understand what I'm telling you?" Sofia pulled off one glove and extended her hand in the human greeting gesture. When Kailtas simply stared at it, she shrugged and gestured toward the dwelling behind her. "I understand perfectly. That's why I've spent the last 3 months getting ready. Come on inside. It's warmer, and I just made coffee. You folks look like you could use some." The interior of Sofia's dwelling was impossibly comfortable. Heat radiated from a large stone structure that the human called a fireplace. Another controlled combustion event. This one apparently intended to warm the living space. The walls showed evidence of recent reinforcement with additional insulation layers. One entire room was stacked floor to ceiling with preserved foods in various states of processing. Another room contained what appeared to be enough combustible plant matter to fuel a small industrial operation. "Ms. Thomas," Sinara tried, accepting the cup of hot liquid more out of diplomatic reflex than desire. "We've reviewed your preparations. What you've accomplished is impressive, but it's fundamentally insufficient. No amount of stored food or combustible fuel can sustain life through 847 years of—" "You're thinking about it wrong," Sofia interrupted, settling into a chair with her own cup. "I'm not trying to survive 847 years. Nobody does that. I'm preparing to survive the first winter, make it to the next growing season, teach my kids how to survive the second winter, and so on. You chunk it down. It's like, okay. Did Xilax explain about Minnesota? You mentioned it's a region on your homeworld with severe cold seasons." Xilax said, his recording equipment humming. "Severe is understating it. 7 months of snow and ice, temperatures down to -40 sometimes, winds that'll freeze exposed skin in minutes. My grandparents homesteaded there. You know what they did? They built insulated houses, stored food, cut firewood, and lived through it every year. Their parents did it. Their grandparents did it. Humans have been surviving resource-scarce cold periods for tens of thousands of years. We're actually pretty good at it." Kailtas set his cup down with enough force that the liquid sloshed. "But this isn't a seasonal cold period. This is 8 centuries. Your grandparents didn't live 8 centuries. No, but their family line did. That's the point." Sofia stood and walked to a wall where she'd mounted several images. "This is my daughter, Emily. She's on the evacuation transport with my grandkids," I insisted. "But I've prepared detailed instructions, preserved seeds, maintained tools, and stored knowledge. If I survive 30 years of this winter, I'll teach the next generation. They'll teach the one after that. 800 years is about 30 generations, give or take. My however many greats-grandchildren will see the spring. That's enough. The silence in the room was absolute, except for the crackling of the fire. You're planning, Sinara said slowly, to establish a multi-generational survival colony through a long dark cycle, using nothing but primitive resource management and stored knowledge. Well, I wouldn't call it primitive, Sofia said with a slight smile. It's just appropriate technology. Why waste energy on stasis fields or climate control when thick walls and a good fire do the job? Why depend on supply chains when you can preserve food and save seeds? You folks have amazing technology, don't get me wrong, but sometimes the old ways work better for long-term resilience. Kael'thas stood abruptly. This is insanity. I'm calling an emergency council session. This human is proposing to do something that has never succeeded in galactic history. Maybe, Sofia said mildly. That's because nobody's tried it the way humans do winters. The emergency council session convened 4 hours later via holographic link, with representatives from 17 species and 4 academy departments. Kael'thas presented the situation with barely controlled agitation, while Sofia sat calmly in her kitchen, occasionally checking on something she called sourdough bread that was rising in a covered container. Council Elder Talana's hologram flickered into focus, her ancient features expressing the kind of patience that came from surviving 600 years of galactic politics. Director Kael'thas, you're telling us the human believes she can survive through preparation and manual labor, what every advanced civilization survives through evacuation and return. That's exactly what I'm saying, Elder. She's rejected all offers of transport. She's refused climate-controlled shelter. She's stockpiling combustible plant matter and preserved foodstuffs as if... He gestured helplessly, as if any of that could possibly matter against 8 centuries of frozen darkness. Miss Thomas, Talana said, turning her attention to the human. Would you explain your reasoning? Sofia wiped flour from her hands and faced the hologram. Elder, has your species ever experienced what we call an ice age? A period of extended cold across most of a planet? Yes, twice in our recorded history. Both times we evacuated to orbital stations until conditions normalized. Right. Humans did it differently. We had at least 4 major ice ages. We survived all of them on the ground. No evacuation, no orbital stations. We didn't have that technology yet. We adapted. We moved when we needed to, stayed when we could, and figured out how to live in conditions that would kill us if we weren't prepared. It's not magic. It's knowledge, practice, and stubbornness. But the resource requirements, an academy scientist began, are manageable if you plan correctly, Sofia interrupted. Look, I've done the math. This valley has enough timber to provide fuel for heating and cooking indefinitely if I practice coppicing. That's a way of harvesting wood that lets the trees regrow. The underground shelter maintains temperature better than above-ground structures. I've got 3 years of preserved food to start, but I'm also maintaining seed banks and breeding stock for small animals that can survive on stored feed. Fresh food is possible even in extreme cold if you understand controlled environment agriculture. I've got books, tools, and instructions for every skill my descendants might need. This isn't a suicide mission. It's homesteading under difficult conditions. Sinara spoke up from her position beside the holographic array. Elder Talana, I've reviewed her preparations. Individually, each element shows theoretical viability. The cumulative effect is unprecedented. She's essentially recreated the survival infrastructure her species evolved with on their homeworld, adapted for local conditions. Evolved with? Talana repeated slowly. Ms. Thomas, you're saying humans evolved these capabilities? This isn't learned behavior? It's both, Sofia said, pulling her bread from its container and beginning to shape it. Humans are persistence hunters, persistent survivors. We're not the fastest or strongest species, but we're really, really good at just continuing. We outlast problems. We endure conditions that would kill us quickly by preparing for them extensively. When everyone else was developing technology to avoid harsh environments, we were developing techniques to thrive in them. Both approaches work. Mine just doesn't require leaving. Kailtas pulled up a data display. Elder, I've consulted the historical archives. 17 species have attempted to weather long, dark cycles. All failed within the 1st century. The cold, the darkness, the complete ecosystem collapse. Did any of them, Sofia interrupted gently, have 800 generations of practice surviving ice ages before they tried? The question hung in the air, like the smoke from her chimney. Zilax, who'd been quietly recording everything, spoke up for the first time in the council session. Elder Talana, I've been documenting the human's methods. She demonstrates capabilities that seem impossible until you watch her perform them. She creates fire through friction using simple tools. She preserves food using salt, smoke, and cold storage without any stasis technology. She's constructed a heating system using nothing but stone, metal, and controlled combustion that maintains comfortable temperatures using fuel she harvests from managed plant growth. Every technique is simple, sustainable, and designed to be taught to others. It's actually quite elegant. It's insane, Kailtas muttered. It's human, Sofia corrected, placing her shaped bread in a heated enclosure near the fire. Look, I understand this doesn't make sense to you. Your civilizations developed advanced technology and used it to overcome environmental challenges. That's brilliant. But humans developed in environments that were constantly trying to kill us. So we learned to prepare for the worst and live through it. We're adapted for endurance. This is what we do. Talana was quiet for a long moment. Miss Thomas, what happens if your calculations are wrong? If the winter is worse than you've prepared for? Then I adapt with what I have, or I die trying to survive, Sofia said simply. But I won't die wishing I'd run away from my home. This is where I chose to live. This is what I prepared for. My family will come back someday, and I want to leave them something to come back to, even if that something is just knowledge that it's possible to stay. Another council member, a crystalline being whose species experience temperature in entirely different ways, chimed in. The human's approach has philosophical implications beyond mere survival. She speaks of multi-generational planning, of sacrifice for descendants she'll never meet, of home as something worth dying to preserve. These are not common values in galactic society. Maybe they should be, Sofia said quietly. You've built a civilization that can move between stars. That's amazing. But you've also built a civilization that abandons worlds when they become difficult. There's value in staying, in being stubborn, in saying this is my home and I'm not leaving. Sometimes the best survival strategy isn't running away. It's digging in. Kailtas looked at Talana's hologram. Elder, what are your orders? Do we evacuate her by force? Talana's ancient eyes studied Sofia for a long moment. No. We document everything. Miss Thomas has the right to choose her own fate. But I want a full research team to remain in orbit, monitoring and recording. When, she corrected herself carefully, this fails, we'll learn from it. And if it succeeds, she paused. If it succeeds, we'll need to rethink several thousand years of established survival protocols. Thank you, Elder, Sofia said. For what it's worth, I've prepared enough space and supplies for a small observation team if anyone wants to learn these techniques firsthand. No pressure, but the offer's there. Zilax's hand shot up before he seemed to realize he was doing it. I volunteer. 3 rotations before the long dark began, Sofia's homestead became the unlikeliest Academy Field research station in galactic history. Zilax had been joined by 4 other researchers, 3 junior scientists and 1 very skeptical senior climatologist named R. Hill, who'd announced he was only staying to document the precise manner of failure. Sofia handed him an axe. Great. You can help split firewood while you're documenting. We need about 3 cords more before the temperature drops. Rahil stared at the primitive tool. I'm a senior researcher. I don't perform manual labor. Then you're going to be a very cold senior researcher, Sofia said cheerfully. No work, no heat. That's the rule. We survive together or not at all. By the end of the first rotation, our Hill had begrudgingly learned to split logs. By the end of the second, he was teaching the others the proper technique, having discovered that there was a certain satisfaction in seeing the woodpile grow through one's own effort. Sinara visited daily, officially to check on the research team, but increasingly to understand what Sofia was building. On the final rotation before the long dark, she found the human teaching the researchers how to make bread. You knead it like this, Sofia demonstrated, her hands working the dough with practiced efficiency. Consistent pressure, folding it over. You're developing the gluten structure. Zilax, you're being too gentle. Really put your back into it. But I'll damage it, Zilax protested, his claws hovering uncertainly over the sticky mass. Bread is tougher than you think, like most good things. Sofia glanced at Sinara. Final evacuation transport leaves in 3 hours, last chance to run away. I'm not running, Sinara said. I'm staying in orbit to coordinate the monitoring operation. Uh-huh. And you couldn't do that from the evacuation fleet? The Academy values thorough documentation. Sure. Sofia smiled. Want to learn how to make bread? It's good for morale during long winters. Something about working with your hands, creating food, the smell when it bakes. It helps people remember that survival isn't just about staying alive. It's about living. Sinara looked at the dough, at the researchers covered in flour and awkwardly mimicking Sofia's movements, at the warm kitchen that smelled of baking and wood smoke and felt nothing like an impending apocalypse. Show me, she said. 4 hours later, the last evacuation transport lifted into the darkening sky. Sofia stood outside her dwelling, watching it disappear, a cup of tea steaming in her hands. The first ice crystals were beginning to form in the air, catching the fading light like tiny stars falling upward. Zilax joined her, wrapped in 3 layers of what Sofia called sweaters, knitted garments she'd made during the preparation months. Are you frightened? He asked. A little, Sofia admitted. It's natural to be scared of the unknown. But I'm also prepared, and I'm not alone. You're here. Our Hill's here, even though he won't admit he's decided to stay. We've got food, shelter, heat, and knowledge. That's more than most pioneers start with. Your species are natural pioneers, aren't they? We're natural, stubborn fools who don't know when to quit, Sofia corrected with a laugh. But yeah, I guess that's the same thing. We see a harsh environment and think, I bet I could live there. We see an impossible situation and think, I bet I could survive that. We see 800 years of winter and think, I bet my great-great-great however many grandkids would like to see spring. It's not rational. It's just human. The light faded further. The temperature dropped perceptibly. Somewhere in the distance, the wind began to howl with the first notes of the coming storm. "Come on," Sofia said. "Let's get inside." First lesson of winter survival. Don't stand around outside when there's a warm fire and fresh bread waiting. The hard work starts tomorrow. Tonight we rest. The long dark descended like a curtain falling across the world. Within a week, the temperature had dropped to -50 standard degrees. Within a month, -100. The snow fell in sheets, then drifts, then walls of white that buried everything that couldn't withstand the weight. Inside Sofia's carefully prepared homestead, the fire burned steadily. The researchers learned to maintain it, to feed it, to read its moods and needs. They learned to cook without automated systems, to preserve food without stasis fields, to repair tools and clothing by hand. Rahel discovered he had an unexpected talent for woodworking. Zilax became the best baker after Sofia herself. They took turns maintaining the solar collectors during the brief periods of dim light, managing the underground greenhouses, checking the structural integrity of their shelter. Sofia taught them songs from Earth, work rhythms that made manual labor easier. She told them stories about human history, ice ages and migrations, settlers and pioneers, every ancestor who'd looked at an impossible environment and decided to make it home anyway. She showed them how to read the wind, predict the weather, understand the patterns of survival that her species had learned across millennia. Talana's holographic visits became weekly meetings that the researchers looked forward to. She brought news from the evacuation fleet, updates on the other colony worlds, reports from the Academy's growing interest in what they were calling the Thomas experiment. "There's a debate happening in the council," Talana reported during one such session, her hologram flickering slightly from the interference of the constant storms. "About whether your approach represents a viable alternative to evacuation protocols or a dangerous rejection of technological progress." Sofia, who was teaching R. Hill how to card wool, looked up. "Can't it be both? Dangerous doesn't mean wrong. My ancestors did dangerous things every day. That's how they survived." "The philosophical implications are significant," Talana said. "You're demonstrating that resilience doesn't require technological advancement. That simple techniques, properly applied, can achieve what we thought required our most sophisticated systems. It's humbling." "I'm not trying to humble anybody," Sofia said. "I'm just trying to survive winter and teach these folks how to do the same. If that has philosophical implications, they're yours to work out. I'm just living my life." Sinara, who'd been coordinating the orbital monitoring, added her report. "The atmospheric readings are unprecedented. Temperatures are now below any sustainable range for unprotected carbon-based life. Wind speeds exceed anything in our safety protocols. The precipitation has crystallized into particulate ice that would shred unprotected tissue. And inside your shelter, you're knitting?" "Mittens," Sofia confirmed, holding up her work. "Zilax keeps complaining his claws get cold during firewood collection. These will help." The human is using a primitive textile creation technique to solve an environmental hazard that would require thermal regulation technology in any other context. Sinara said, something like wonder in her voice. She's applied appropriate solutions at every scale, from planetary survival to individual comfort. It's remarkable. "It's just paying attention," Sofia said. "You notice problems. You solve them with what you have. You don't wait for perfect solutions. You use good enough of our solutions and iterate. That's all survival is. One problem at a time, one solution at a time, forever." 3 months into the long dark, Rahil made an announcement during dinner. "I've completed my preliminary documentation. My conclusion is that this approach shouldn't work according to any established model of survival efficiency. Resource expenditure is too high. Energy return on investment is too low. Manual labor requirements exceed sustainable limits for any species we've studied. Everyone waited. And yet, our Hill continued, it does work, because the models don't account for human stubbornness. They don't quantify the morale boost of shared meals. They don't measure the efficiency gains of multi-generational knowledge transfer. They can't calculate the survival advantage of simply refusing to accept that something is impossible. He looked at Sofia. I understand now why your species survives. You don't believe in unsurvivable conditions. You just believe in preparing better. Sofia smiled. Welcome to the human approach to life, our Hill. We're glad to have you. 6 months in, Zilax presented his own research findings during a council session that had grown to include representatives from 30 species. I've been studying human history, he reported. Specifically, their survival through resource scarcity, environmental collapse, and catastrophic climate shifts. The pattern is consistent. When faced with extinction-level conditions, humans don't evacuate. They innovate. They adapt their behavior, their tools, and their society to match the environment. Then they teach the next generation, who teaches the next, until the crisis passes. They treat multi-generational problems with multi-generational solutions. It's simple, it's elegant, and we've never tried it because we assumed technology could solve everything faster. Are you suggesting, a council member asked carefully, that we should abandon technological solutions? No, Zilax said. I'm suggesting we should add human solutions to our repertoire. Technology for what technology does best. Human resilience for what it does best. Both have value. We've been over-relying on one and ignoring the other. In her kitchen, watching via hologram, Sofia kneaded bread and said nothing. Sometimes the best contribution was letting others reach the right conclusions themselves. Year 1 of the long dark passed. Then year 2, then 5. The research team had grown. More volunteers arrived, young academics curious about the primitive survival experiment, who stayed because they found meaning in the work. The homestead expanded. More underground chambers, more cultivation spaces, more storage. Sofia trained teachers who trained others. Techniques spread. Knowledge multiplied. By year 10, other humans who'd evacuated started returning. Not many at first. Just a few families who'd heard about Sofia's success and decided to try it themselves. Sofia helped them establish their own homesteads, taught them the techniques, shared her seed banks and breeding stock. A community grew in the valley, bound not by technology, but by shared purpose and mutual support. The academy watched. Tilana, now personally invested in the project, visited holographically every week. You've created a culture of resilience, she told Sofia during one such visit. A society built on preparation, knowledge transfer, and long-term thinking. It's spreading beyond your settlement. 3 other colony worlds facing environmental challenges have requested human advisors to teach these methods. Sofia, now 57 and teaching her granddaughter, who'd returned with her daughter, how to maintain the seed library, shrugged. Makes sense. Humans have been teaching survival to each other for a long time. Might as well teach other species too. We're all in this galaxy together. The council is debating new protocols, Tilana continued. Before ordering evacuations, we'll now consult with human advisors about settlement-based survival options. You've fundamentally changed how we approach environmental crises. That's nice, Sofia said. But honestly, I wasn't trying to change anything. I was just trying to stay home. By year 25, the Academy had established formal resilience studies programs on 6 worlds, all taught by humans or human-trained instructors. The techniques weren't just for extreme environments. They applied to resource management, long-term planning, cultural sustainability. Species that had relied on technology for 10,000 years were rediscovering the value of manual skills, local knowledge, and generational thinking. Raheel, who'd become the foremost alien expert on human survival techniques, published a paper titled Persistence as Technology: How Human Stubbornness Rewrote Survival Protocols. It became required reading in Academy curricula. Sofia's Valley community had grown to nearly 200 humans and 30 aliens who'd chosen to stay and learn. They celebrated Earth holidays adapted for the long dark. They created new traditions. They married, had children, taught those children the skills that would carry them through 8 centuries of winter. Sofia, now in her 70s, spent more time teaching than doing physical labor. Her granddaughter, Emily, had taken over day-to-day operations of the original homestead. Her great-grandchildren were learning the same skills Sofia had learned from her grandparents on Minnesota farms so long ago. Sinara, who visited regularly despite officially retiring from her emergency coordinator position, found Sofia one day sitting by the fire, writing in a journal. "Documentation for the next generation?" Sinara asked. "Love letter to my great-great-great-great-grandkids," Sofia corrected. "They'll be the ones who see spring. I want them to know their Grandma Pat was thinking about them, that we did this for them. That home was worth staying for." "You've proven your point," Sinara said. "Humans can survive anything. You don't have to keep—" "I'm not trying to prove anything anymore," Sofia interrupted gently. "I'm just living. That's what you folks never understood. Survival isn't about proving something or achieving something. It's just about continuing, one day at a time, one generation at a time. We're not surviving winter, we're living through it. There's a difference." Sinara settled into the chair across from Sofia. "Teach me the difference." Sofia smiled. "It's simple. Surviving means just staying alive. Living means finding joy in the staying. Baking bread because it smells good, not just because you need calories. Teaching children because you love them, not just because they need knowledge. Knitting mittens, telling stories, singing songs, celebrating holidays even when the sun hasn't shone in 25 years. That's living. That's what humans do. We don't just endure hardship, we find ways to be happy anyway." "That seems impossibly optimistic." "It's impossibly human," Sofia corrected, which amounts to the same thing. Outside, the wind howled. The temperature read -187 degrees. The sun was a distant memory for children born in the long dark. Spring was still 822 years away. Inside, bread was baking. Children were laughing. Someone was playing a guitar. The fire burned warm and steady. Sofia returned to her letter. "Dear whoever you are," she wrote, "by the time you read this, I'll have been gone for centuries. But I want you to know that we thought about you. Every day. Every decision. We planted these trees for you. We preserved this knowledge for you. We stayed so you'd have a home to return to. The winter was long, but we lived through it. Not just survived, lived. We hope you'll find that spring was worth the wait. Love, Grandma Pat." P.S. The sourdough starter in the cold storage is 800 years old. Don't kill it. Your great whatever grandmother will haunt you if you kill the starter. She signed it, dated it year 25 of the long dark, and added it to the archive that would be passed down through the generations. Then she stood, stretched, and called out to the kitchen. "Emily, is that stew ready?" We've got hungry people to feed. Because that's what humans did. They survived by living. They endured by thriving. They faced 800 years of winter by making sure every single day contained something worth surviving for. The Academy was still learning, but Sofia Thomas had already known. Home wasn't a place you left when times got hard. Home was the place you stayed, prepared for, and passed down to your children's children's children, however many generations that took. Spring would come, eventually. Humans were patient. They'd wait. They'd endure. They'd live. And they'd be there when the sun finally rose again.